So Kent, now that you've had some time to spend with the Montagnard community, can you tell me a little bit about how would you define the Montagnard community now?
Well, prior to conducting the interviews, I would have thought that a community as relatively small as they are, only 8,000 members in Greensboro, would have been really unified, seeing as how far they are away from home, and I also assumed that they all spoke the same language. And then after conducting the interviews, I learned that they're coming from different tribes, from different religions, and from different communities over in Vietnam. So when they got over here, they just happened to be with other Montagnards, but they didn't necessarily speak the same language. They didn't necessarily have the same history or culture or traditions. So I think that was the most interesting thing in terms of, in contrast to what I believed before. But that being said, they are living in the same area with one another and interacting with one another on a daily basis and are battling with the same problems. So that, in that sense, they are unified, but otherwise there is a lot of fragmentation.
Interesting. Well, again, in gaining, now that you've gained this greater perspective of the Montagnard community, and now that you consider all the ethics of community partnerships, what opportunities do you see to get involved with this community?
Well, from both interviews I conducted, I actually learned about different opportunities where the community is in need and no one is serving that need. In the first set of interviews, I learned that senior citizens are in great need of health literacy, of language training, because they come over here having spent their entire lives in Vietnam not knowing how to conduct themselves in America. And all of a sudden they're inundated with everything we have in a modern, quote-unquote, civilization. And I think, there's a big deficit in services for senior citizens. Also tutoring for the entire population. The children actually have quite a few tutoring services through the school system. And then the most interesting opportunity I saw to get involved was a suggestion by Beth Grove, who's one of the English teachers at the Montagnard Association, and she said she wished that every Montagnard family who were over here had an American family as a counterpart, so kind of an adoptive family system, because they come over here and they don't know the basics. They don't know how to pay a bill. They've never done that before. They don't know how to go to the store, drive a car, any of these things that we take for granted. They need assistance with. So I think that would be the most important.
That's interesting. You mentioned Beth Grove. You actually interviewed two individuals. What were your considerations when you selected those two individuals?
Well, actually, I interviewed three because two of them were together. ECU is the head of the Montagnard Association, and Beth Grove is one of the English tutors there. And then the third interview I conducted was Raleigh Bailey, who's from the Center for New North Carolinians, and he's been working with the Montagnards. He was in Cambodia when the initial group of Montagnards came out of the jungle, crossed the border, and brought them here, the initial group of 200 freedom fighters, as they were called. In terms of selection of these candidates, I think the Montagnard Association was almost a given because it's such a pivotal part of the Montagnard community here, and they provide all of those services to some extent that I had mentioned in the previous question, but just lack the resources. And then Raleigh Bailey is the most significant academic in the area, and he has worked with nearly all of the Montagnards coming over here and has a vast amount of experience with refugee services.
So how did your selections further your understanding of the community as a whole?
Well, I think Raleigh Bailey was really interesting because he brought a different perspective, because he's not technically part of the community, but he has so many affiliations within the community and such a reputation that he's gained within the community, that he was able to provide that sort of insight that I couldn't have achieved otherwise. In terms of the Montagnard Association, they're working within the community and they're part of the community every day. So I think that's limited in scope. it's great to have members of the community to interview, but also they have their own biases and perspectives that Riley Bailey, had thought about differently.
Excellent. If you were provided with additional time in the Montagnard community, what further information would you wish to ascertain?
Well, the impression I got from the Montagnard Dega Association was that everyone was on the same page in terms of their views of one another and their views of their families back in Vietnam. When I interviewed Riley Bailey, he talked about as I mentioned in the first question, the fragmentation between the groups, and he talked about how there was a divide between those who supported the resistance back in Vietnam and those who decided that when they came over here, they were done fighting and they were going to just generate a new life here, separate of what was happening back home. So I'd like to delve further into this sort of division between the resistance and the anti-resistance movements. I think that would be really interesting, and I'm just not sure who exactly would go to get a true perspective on that.
Excellent.